Are we in a new era of men's tennis on the ATP Tour? I think we are. And I'm going to talk about it in this video about how we've turned a corner where the young gunners finally believe that they can win against the best of all time, like Novak Djokovic, Rafa Nadal, and they've proved it. I'm going to talk about the difference in confidence from now with guys like Jannik Sinner and Carlos Alcaraz winning majors compared to the generation before them, the Tsitsipas, the Thiems, the Medvedevs, the Zverevs, and what's different. It's interesting to me. I've had a lot of time to think about it after the Australian Open, so let's get into it. This is The Slice. Yeah, I've been thinking about it. Are we in a new era of men's tennis where Djokovic and Nadal are no longer going to win by default against the next generation of young talent that's coming up in the ATP Tour, even though at this point now they're like 12, 14 years younger than them? I think we have. I think Jannik Sinner, as proven at the Australian Open, has signaled that after we've seen Carlos Alcaraz already win 2 majors himself, that we are officially in a new era of men's tennis where the youngest guys on tour believe that they can win because they've done it. I'm going to talk about the difference, like I said, about between Sinner and Alcaraz and Tsitsipas, Thiem, and Zverev, and talk about, was it just bad timing for the latter three there, or are Sinner and Alcaraz actually better than they were? So thanks for being here. If you haven't been here, this is The Slice. Subscribing helps us get to our goal of 20,000 subscribers by the end of the year. So I appreciate you for doing that. But to me, it's clear that we are in a new era. There was a time where Rafa Nadal or Novak Djokovic would just end up winning the biggest matches against the young group of players who were nipping at their heels, but the big goats would always find a way to win and inflict what I have started to think of as mental damage on this younger generation of players. Ever since 2019, 2017, we saw Thiem and Zverev come up the ranks and really start challenging, at that point, the big three at the top of the men's game, where you'd see them take matches against Federer or Djokovic or Nadal at different events, like the ATP Tour Finals or at Masters Series events, and they'd cause upsets, and their game looked and is currently still amazing. And you're like, this is the next generation. This is where they take over from the big three, the three goats, and they're going to run with the tour. But then as the years went on, you just kept seeing losses in the big moments where you're like, maybe this is a changing of the guard. Maybe Thiem will beat Rafa in the French Open final. Doesn't happen in 2018 or 2019. Maybe Tsitsipas will beat Djokovic in the final of the French Open after he's 2 sets to love up, after Djokovic already beat Rafa. No, he doesn't. He comes from behind. Djokovic rips his heart out, and he's really never been the same since. Guys, Zverev's been beating Djokovic at different events like the ATP Tour Finals, the Olympics, but when it comes to the majors, Djokovic still kept finding ways to win. And even over Medvedev, who ended up beating Djokovic at the US Open famously in 2021 to stop the calendar year Grand Slam, that win was, a lot to do with Medvedev, but also a lot to do with the nerves and the moment for Djokovic. So we probably feel like we didn't have his best in that final, and maybe it was a little bit of a gift, not taking anything away from Medvedev, though. Medvedev, I would say, as a more mature player and older than Tsitsipas and Zverev, kind of got through that brain damage period of the GOATs inflicting their just experience and fortitude on these younger players in the biggest moments. Medvedev kind of got through that, although he's still, in 2022, the next major, where he could have been number one solidly after beating Djokovic in the US Open, gave up a 2-set to love lead to Rafa Nadal, the much older, the much physically less at their prime player. So for the last 4 or 5 or 6 years on the ATP Tour, there's been this feeling that no matter how good the young guys get, even in their elderly age, Djokovic and Nadal are still just going to have a step ahead somehow. And would it ever end? We all knew that period would end in pro tennis, but I officially think it has. With Carlos Alcaraz winning Wimbledon last year, beating a good Djokovic in the final to win his second major, and with Jannik Sinner winning the Australian Open this year after beating Djokovic, clobbering Djokovic in the semifinals, and then beating Medvedev in the final. To me, Sinner and Alcaraz are guys that didn't get the early in the career brain damage from Djokovic and Nadal the same way that the other guys did. And I think that winning matches and winning tournaments and winning Grand Slams early on in your career has a huge impact in your confidence, obviously. And I think the reverse is true as well. If you lose these big matches over and over, it starts to just put bad habits in your mind, make you believe things that aren't maybe helpful about, can I ever win a major? Can I ever beat these guys in the final? And I think it comes out in your game in a lot of other ways. And I think we've seen that. But now, as we've talked about it coming into the 2024 season, we have Sinner beating Djokovic multiple times at the end of last year. We have Rafa obviously struggling big time with injuries. We've got Alcaraz, who won against Djokovic in the final of Wimbledon last year. And we've got Medvedev, who has beat Djokovic in the final of the US Open. He's a major winner. So we've got three major winners who believe they can do it again and have proven that they can, basically. It's no longer really an underdog matchup when you have Alcaraz or Sinner or Medvedev against Djokovic or Nadal, in my opinion, in a major at almost any stage of the tournament. Some might call me on that. Maybe it's still a little bit with the experience that Djokovic and Nadal have. They still do have a bit of an advantage, but it is marginal at best. And I think that the athleticism and the dynamic nature of the games of Sinner and Alcaraz especially have turned the tides. I think their youth and their physicality and their explosion in their game makes up for any experience they lack. And they don't even lack that much experience because they've now both won majors beating the best players in the field. And that's a big deal. So that presents the question. Are Sinner and Alcaraz just better tennis players than Thiem, Tsitsipas, Zverev, Medvedev? I think there's a lot to be said about that. I think that Sinner, I think it's really hard to really define that. I think it's you're comparing eras a little bit, but you're comparing also experience. And like I've said this whole video, losses that affect your clutch factor later on in matches or tournaments. For example, I think if Dominic Thiem had won one of the first French Open finals he played against Rafa Nadal, maybe the 2018 or maybe the 2019, I think he's played 3. The odds of him becoming a more confident player and winning more majors, and he ended up winning the U.S. Open, obviously, over Zverev in one of the tightest matches we've ever seen in a major final. The dynamic of a career can change. If you're just like, I'm a winner, earlier on, I beat my idol at the French Open at the biggest stage, you can start to believe that pretty quick. And that, I feel like, could change the rest of your career. You're not going to tell me that Dominic Thiem back in the day wasn't as explosive as Carlos Alcaraz or Jannik Sinner. He was. He had just as big of a forehand. He had a massive game. Zverev, he's different. He's taller than those guys. He has a bigger serve. He's also got a huge game, but he also had a lot of early losses that I feel like affected his career. Maybe he was also just less clutch of a player in general, but how your success and your path through your early days, I think, really matters. Medvedev's kind of a different cat. Tsitsipas, same thing. You're going to tell me that he's a less explosive player than Carlos Alcaraz or Jannik Sinner? I don't really think so. I think he's bigger than those guys. I think he's got bigger weapons in some ways. And he's got more vulnerabilities in some ways. I will say what I think Sinner and Alcaraz have above the other 4, including Medvedev, is completeness to their game. That is really scary and really good. Alcaraz, for example, obviously has the least big serve probably of the bunch of these guys, but he's got a monster forehand, monster backhand, can do anything he wants with it. He's the best athlete of the bunch, in my opinion, as far as movement around the court. He has unbelievable hands with the drop shot. He can come forward. He's the current champion of Wimbledon, so he can come to the net, finish off games. He's clutch, and he's got that early winning in his career. So I think in reality, he probably will go down as the best player out of the group of these guys, and I think he is the best athlete and probably the best tennis player. But he's got a completeness to his game that maybe the other earlier guys don't have, and that didn't let them get those earlier wins against Djokovic and Nadal. And same with Sinner. Sinner's taken a little bit longer to develop, but now that he has, I mean, what did we just see at the Australian Open? Fully complete game, huge serve, forehand, backhand dominance, can absolutely crush the ball. When Sinner moves out to the forehand outside the single sideline, is there anyone who can hit a better forehand up the line than he can? No, there isn't. It's unbelievable. And he can come forward. He's not as comfortable at the net, but he's comfortable enough to be dangerous up there. And the maturity to his game, where he felt like when Medvedev was blitzing him, he could just give up the baseline a bit and still win and doesn't have to play out of his socks or play ultra high risk tennis. He's got now, I would say, the completeness to his game that some of these other players lacked. Thiem had the one-handed backhand. Tsitsipas has the one-handed backhand. Zverev has the serving yips, has the non-clutch factor. So is it a case of Sinner and Alcaraz just being better than the previous generation? I think marginally. But I'm not discounting those other guys' skill levels. I think a lot of their issues in getting out in front of Djokovic and Nadal has come from just taking too many early beatdowns from these guys and not being able to get over the mental hurdle of playing them at the biggest stages and believing they can win. Sinner and Alcaraz believe they can win. You know why? Because they've done it. And Medvedev's right there. He's like a middle-ager on tour now. He believes he can do it. And I really think we are in a new stage now where Djokovic is not just going to be the outright total favorite of every major he goes in, and the whole story of the season. It's just going to be like, will Djokovic win the calendar slam? Will he win every major he goes in? That's exciting, but I think it's personally much more interesting and engaging when we have young guys like they are now who really believe they can win and have proven they can do it. So are we in a new generation era of tennis that will see the younger players finally get on top? I think we are. And I think that's pretty obvious. We are in a very exciting year of tennis, and we're heading into some interesting events. We got the Sunshine Double coming up. We got Rotterdam going on right now on the ATP. We've got Dubai and Acapulco coming up. It's going to be good. Keep it locked here on the Slice. Thanks for subscribing. Let me know your thoughts on what we talked about today down below, and we will see you next time here on the show.